As the official healthcare provider of Minnesota United, Allina Health is dedicated to delivering pro-level care for our Loons. But our partnership goes much deeper than what happens on the field. From our shared support of youth-focused nonprofits like Roots for the Home Team to empowering adaptive athletes through the MNUFC Power Soccer Team, Allina Health and Minnesota United are committed to making our communities all together better. Learn more at allinahealth.org/loons. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Sound of the Loons, presented by Allina Health. And this time, I get to be joined by, I was going to say world traveler, but I guess right now we'll stay with like North American traveler, MLS broadcaster, Apple former player, super dad, carpool, all of the above, Brian Dunseth. Thank you for taking the time out of your super busy schedule to join me today.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I did have, I think I've officially added Lyft driver to my repertoire of what I'm capable of doing with my 3 semesters of Cal State Fullerton back in the day. So it paid off.
As long as you're charging your kids for it, I mean, or the other families, like that's where, although what goes around comes around usually with the carpooling.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like for our kids, we try to give our kids everything that maybe we didn't have, or more importantly, what we wanted. But I mean, today with the cost of everything and trying to put our kids in great situations where they can fail in a controlled environment and yet at the same time succeed before the real world potentially eats them alive. Yeah, it's been fun to watch my kids kind of organically fall into their sporting ventures while keeping those knuckleheads out of trouble as they kind of transition into 9th grade, 7th grade, and 1st grade. God, I'm getting old.
Well, let me know if you figure out how to, like, in a good way, explain to your child that life isn't fair, and they come out the other end of the conversation feeling better about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, the one thing I tell my boys all the time, I'm like, the real world, man, it's tough. Not a lot of people are going to care about you. So, that bond between each other is going to be really important as you move forward in life. But in the meantime, keep your nose out of trouble, man. You look for trouble, you're going to find trouble. And I think the most important thing I always tell them, there's always someone that's bigger, faster, and stronger than you. So use your words wisely, because getting punched in the face sucks.
Well, I think you had just had your 3rd shortly before I did a game with you, International Champions Cup at Cal.
I think that was my 2nd. I think that
was that your 2nd? Okay.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And I remember we were, walking to dinner. We were all going somewhere. And my daughter was pretty young because I was still trying to get the fridge in the room for the milk, And so like, I feel like we all, when we're in this industry, we get to kind of watch our kids grow up and share stories along the way. And it's crazy how fast it goes, much like the teams that you cover, maybe somebody that started at Real Salt Lake when you first were covering the team and now they're, their kids playing for the academy or something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and you've seen the infrastructure out in Minnesota. When I look at what's happening down at Harriman, they call it Zebra is a training facility, and you have the full stadium, which is where Real Monarchs play. But you also have a STEM school that's attached to STEM high school that's attached. So you have kind of this public STEM school with all of the academy kids. So the kids could be 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 18, obviously, before they graduate and go to college or they go into the Monarchs or they make their way to the first team. But kind of seeing the progression of the facility, and now the Utah Royals, they're going to actually have a nicer part of the facility than the men's team for Real Salt Lake, Real Monarchs, even into the academy. So ownership, and then the fields themselves. It's the largest freestanding indoor soccer structure that doesn't have like posts in between.
Yes.
So it's wide open. And Kyndra, I mean, you know this, we grew up in a time, I always joke around, we're like the Dick Butkuses of soccer. We're like the OGs where, like I think the most money I ever made in my career was like 120,000. And then I would use maybe like a comparable, maybe Justin Glad, and the kid's like on 1.4 million. So it kind of shows this incredible growth. But when I go down there, my son is a part of kind of the ID Real Salt Lake Academy for 12 years old. I'm just like, I'm so insanely jealous and yet envious of what's happening right now. And obviously the institutional money that comes along with the investment. But more important, I think it's people like ourselves that kind of went through the early tough times of what soccer looked like in the United States, and the variables from the mid 80s and the NASL all the way to now what we have in Major League Soccer, and just seeing those that have gone through it that have now given back and on in all of these aspects of the game, that now you have kind of this innate infrastructure of knowledge that I think is just this rapid progression of growth in Major League Soccer.
What I think what's really cool about it, and we have it a lot here in Minnesota, is that not everybody that was sort of the OG of soccer in this state has to be a coach necessarily, or a director of coaching, or the head of a club, or the head of an academy. But like, you go to anything in Minnesota and it's like not even 6 degrees of separation of people that you knew, interacted with, and Manny Lagos goes through much the same thing, right? If anybody like goes, you see all these people that at some point, like Mark Ewell was my ODP coach, Jackson's dad. And I remember going to, ODP camp at some dorm in Northern Illinois, in DeKalb, and now I see him all the time because he's like the head of MTA, and you talk about Jackson. It's just like this crazy. So everybody's still imparting their knowledge, even if they're not necessarily directly in the sport. And so that's always fun to see. And I joke around, like my nieces and nephews, they like talk about all these domes they're going to. I'm like, there were 2 domes when I grew up, Augsburg and the Bubble in Woodbury. I'm like, beyond that, like, so we were practicing at 11 o'clock at night on school nights because there was nowhere else in the middle of winter. Now they've got like these insane facilities there, which is awesome. I'm not like mad about it, but it's just that you had to kind of go through that to get where they are today. And it's really cool to see. So, and we get to see it. You get to see it in your market. I get to see it in my market. So all good. And speaking of MLS and the strides and where it's been and where it's come from, we'll get to the season itself in 2024, but you just mentioned it, talking about what you made initially. And the gentleman who puts our rundown together, Kyle, was like, not to date him, but he played for the Fusion, so like, you talk about where this league has come from, right?
Yeah.
Some of the, like, and the Dallas Burn, probably 2 of the sweetest jerseys right behind the Wizards. Like, what does it look like for you in this moment covering this league compared to where it was when you were starting?
Man, and it's funny. I was actually just having this conversation last night with Pancho and Adrian down in Houston. Part of our span, we call ourselves Los Hermanos de HG. It's kind of our big joke on the road with Bretos and company when we all get together. But we were laughing about, like, you think about the insane amount of growth in Major League Soccer, and there's this new generation that are stumbling upon MLS that have no idea that there was a Miami Fusion team. That literally, that stadium where Inter Miami is playing right now was just twisted sideways. And their training facility was actually the Baltimore Orioles preseason baseball, spring training baseball stadium. And we'd actually train in the outfield. And our locker rooms were inside of the locker rooms because they were gone, 90% of the year. I mean, Ray Hudson was my manager, Rocky Ray, the magician of words. I had Nick Raimondo and Ian Bishop and Preki and Chris Henderson, who's now the general. I mean, what a team. And we were the best team in MLS. And that was when September 11th, 2001 happened. Our season was cut short, and unceremoniously some calls went against us. And, we were one Troy Dyack header away from potentially winning an MLS Cup final. So, yeah, I mean, as I look back, there's something so incredible. And I don't know if this is a positive or a negative, but I can remember going and picking up my last paycheck. And Ray Hudson said, "Bryony, it's the last paycheck you're ever going to get with the Miami Fusion." And I was like, "Okay, great, Ray, but like, what's next?" He goes, "I don't know." So we were putting this dispersal draft, the entire team, and like Tyrone Marshall went to LA Galaxy, and like Nicky Raimondo went to DC United, and Chris Henderson and Pablo Mastroeni went to Colorado Rapids. I ended up at the Columbus Crew, and Tampa Bay Mutiny was contracted at the same time. And so, like, as I've been a part of these like monumental moments in this kind of like nuclear arms race of investment and spending in Major League Soccer, like when I came back in 2005 to join Real Salt Lake, the expansion fee was $5 million. Like, when you wrap your head around, you say like, well, how much did David Tepper spend in Charlotte? How much, is San Diego coming in with? Like 5 million bucks and playing at a college football stadium versus now you got to be walking in with $1 billion. Then that's for the team, it's for the facility, it's for the infrastructure, it's for the game day experience. So
The
yeah,
stadium
oh
that
yeah,
everybody's building now,
yeah,
if it's
yeah. And
public or private.
yeah, and the incredible stadiums that we're seeing. I mean, it's not like we were back in the day when you brought up the Dallas Burn. That was that transition year. I got traded unceremoniously because Jeff Cunningham popped his hamstring. We both made the same amount of money, and I got traded because they had to move a player. I got traded to Dallas with already out of the playoffs. Coach gets fired. GM quits. We're playing at Dragon Stadium, which was a high school football stadium, black AstroTurf, and you get kicked out because the cheerleaders had to practice. I mean, it's wild times. It's lunacy to think about the early days and kind of the building blocks and the functionality of what MLS was versus, the incredible facilities we see nowadays.
Yeah, I think we are incredibly fortunate to be able to travel to most of the stadiums, if not all. And people will ask me all the time, what is your favorite stadium? I'm assuming you've probably been to everyone. There's a couple still that I haven't been to, Charlotte, which is not soccer specific, and Nashville, I haven't actually been to yet. But what's your favorite stadium to travel to? And you're not obligated to say Allianz Field.
Yeah, no, it's not, unfortunately. But I did enjoy my time there with the U.S. team last fall. Um, I don't know, man. I really enjoy BMO Stadium out for LAFC. I think, Max and I primarily are doing a lot of West Coast in the Western Conference. So Seattle, Portland, LA, Real Salt Lake, and then we kind of just bounce around to a few different places. Um, I think Cincinnati's environment is really incredible. There's something special about Portland. I just think that just that atmosphere, and maybe it's a little bit of a soft spot because of Clive Charles and the relationship that I had with him as a kind of father figure and a coach back in the day. My middle son's named Micah Clive after him. Um, yeah, but I would say with like the environment, it's tough for me not to put LAFC's environment in kind of like that top three or that Mount Rushmore, if you will, of incredible facilities matching up with the atmosphere. But Columbus, Lower.com Field has been great. Cincinnati's been great. I think those are kind of the groups of my top four right now.
Yeah, have you been to St. Louis yet or no?
Oh my God. Yeah, I
Okay.
got St. Louis up there as well. And yeah, well, and especially last year in the run of form, you felt like they were just untouchable for any team that went there that could drag a point out of them, Bradley Carnell's side. But like we're seeing with a few teams, it's the second year hiccups can come back to bite you. And MLS, as you know better than anyone, it is all about momentum. Once you get that momentum and that self-confidence, all of a sudden those spots in the Western Conference change dramatically.
Yeah, I feel like I brought up Uncle Mo one time on a broadcast with Cal Williams, and he was kind of looked at me like I had two heads. I'm like, no, momentum is a real thing, whether it's in a match, whether it's in a season. And I'm sure a lot of these teams that are on the struggle bus right now are hoping that they catch and get on that bus, the bus going the right direction pretty quickly, like maybe we've seen from Dallas with just the coaching change. So it's tough to say. And St. Louis has got to figure some things out. So what is the best moment you've seen from 2024 so far? And whether it's a game you've done yourself or something else, what is the best maybe moment, best moments are tough, but
Yeah.
maybe the best like overall thing from a team that you've seen that's kind of thought, made you go, wow, okay, I didn't see this coming.
Yeah, I would say Real Salt Lake, and I know I'm going to come off as a bit of a homer on this one, but I had them. I think I had them maybe fifth in the West, but I mean, I said publicly you could have them in fourth position, you could have them in eighth position because historically they're kind of always fighting for those last couple of spots in the Western Conference. I certainly along with everybody else, never in a million years thought that they would be in the run of form that they are. I mean, Andres Gomez is on fire right now, and seeing him settle in and adapt after that first year was a real struggle. Anderson Julio is now finding his rhythm and scoring goals, being a super sub when, it almost felt like at times it would be kryptonite once he got into the final third. And then the Chicho effect has been amazing. And I tell this story only because I want people to understand the athlete and the human being. I just got my hip replaced about 3 months ago. And I got a message after surgery because I posted the video of me like on my feet walking on crutches, like maybe 2.5, 3 hours after surgery. And I get this text from Mike Waldvogel, who's the stadium PA guy. And Mike's like, "Yo, are you guys good? Like, you guys good with food?" And I was like, "Yeah, my family's great. Why?" And he goes, "No, I showed Chicho the video. He wants to like send dinner to you guys. Make sure like you." And I was like Chicho and I are cool, but like we're not friends by any means. And like, like when you see anybody, you just say, "Hey, what's up, man?" But like for him to like offer that, I was just like, he's the captain, he's the genuine leader in that locker room. And it just shows, I think, this little bit behind the curtain of like who he is, which has led to, I think, a big reason why the team has had so much success. And his run of form. If we're not talking about Lionel Messi, Inter Miami, Luis Suarez, Busquets, Alba, Tata, the Messi effect right now, the biggest story in MLS in my mind would have to be what Chicho Arango and Real Salt Lake are doing.
Well, I feel like you have to include Pablo in that
Yeah.
conversation, though, because I remember Tyler and I did the game before they were at Chicago. And I know Chicago at the time was not in the form they're in now, or at least on the run they're in now.
Yeah.
But also, they decimated Chicago and they had half their starting lineup. They were missing their center backs. They played their two, played midfielders as center backs.
Yeah.
They rotated Gavin Beavers into goal, and Pablo was kind of like, that decision was made before this game even happened. We have a certain number of games that Gavin is slated to play, and we're keeping him in there regardless of who's in front of him. And like, they were phenomenal. So there's this belief that's in place.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this Mastroeni effect on that same team, just like Cucho's had as well. Or wait, Chicho.
Chicho. Yeah, I do it too. Trust me, I do it too. And the one thing also is that, the ownership and hierarchy basically wiped out Pablo's coaching staff at the end of last season. His two assistants, and as well as his goalkeeper coach, and promoted Mirza from the academy in Real Monarchs. Hamasan Alave graduated from Monarchs head coach. And then bringing Nate Miller, who was Landon's assistant down in San Diego Loyal. Then just seeing, and Anthony Pulis coming in, who had some time with Jason Kreis down in Miami. Jason Kreis coming in the offseason to have kind of this connectivity between, and Jason very clearly does not want to coach ever again. So this was kind of his move to have the connectivity back at Real Salt Lake, where he had so much success, between kind of the front office and the ownership into the coaching. And then you have kind of this institutional knowledge and history of success, which we were all kind of intrigued to see how that was going to work out. But all of a sudden, Pablo's got like another voice next to him that's like, hey, it's not just me. Like, listen to Jason. Jason has the same train of thought. So yeah, Pablo's great, man. I mean, it's tough not to, in a weird way, have a man crush on Pablo, because you'll be like, yeah, Pablo, man, like what a day. And you're like, how the sun, it like feeds the energy and the soul of the leaves, and then the plant has the roots in the ground, and you're just like, yo, bro, it's not that deep, man. And
you're like in an SNL skit or something. You kind of feel like it.
Dude, I played with him in Miami. I was roommates with him on the national team, and just the one thing that maybe the biggest compliment I can give Pablo is that he's the same human being. Like, he's the same person. He's such a genuine human. That yeah, I'm really happy to see his growth as a manager, a tactician, and a man manager. The connectivity, as you know, we see managers come and go because whether they're ex-players or they're established head coaches, that if you don't have that camaraderie, the ability to connect on a human level, at times it's going to be difficult to get the performance out of the individual as well as the collective.
Just because the Loons are away doesn't mean you have to watch the match from home. With Loons Watch Spots, presented by Coors Light, you can find a piece of that Allianz Field atmosphere at some of your favorite Twin Cities locations. Check out the full list of locations and upcoming watch parties at MNUFC.com/Loons Watch Spots. Well, and a genuineness, and I think that's what you see from Chicho, and you see it from Mastroeni. I mean, guys can sniff through that lack of genuineness
100%.
easily, right? So on the other hand, then on the other side of that coin is what's been the team that you've been most shocked by, or maybe the most underwhelming team? I know you did a bit on MLS the other couple weeks ago about St. Louis, saying they got all the pieces of the puzzle, like,
Yeah,
and who knows, but
yeah.
not like, what's been the most underwhelming thing for you from a team this season?
Yeah, I would say it's there's four teams. I'll start in the Eastern Conference. Nobody saw Philly having the struggles
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but historically, I can remember a Toronto FC team that went far in a CONCACAF Champions League and didn't make the playoffs. I remember Sporting Kansas City a couple different years. We saw Seattle after winning CONCACAF Champions League and being the first team to ever do so in Major League Soccer, just have a stinker and never get it right and miss out on the playoffs. So Philly, Jim Curtin, especially the home form. I don't think it helps Kai Wagner and the words that are coming out of his mouth, especially when they stuck by him and got a new contract, but that's neither here nor there. The other team have to be Orlando.
Yeah, yes.
I thought with Nico Ladero coming over that would provide maybe a little bit of a different look, and then with Muriel being signed, and those are the two teams. The and I played with Oscar Pareja in both New
Mhm.
England and Dallas. The ethos of who he is and what he asks of his team to mimic his personality, to mimic who he was as a player. And that's, the gray area, the technical side and the tactics are there, but the grit and the determination, I call it the Dunsethery, the dark arts, the combativeness, it's just all lacking this year. So those will be the two surprises on the East Coast. West Coast has to be Seattle, and it has to
Mhm.
be St. Louis. I
Mhm.
thought St. Louis, as I said during the This Is MLS hit I did with Taylor and Mo and Kalen the other day, I was really, I mean, they got their business done early. Totland came in, they went and got Dirk in. I know they lost Joaquini, but I thought this was the year Adeniran was going to take that next step and he'd have more time. AZ Jackson coming off his first national team cap. I thought that all Celio Pompeo, he
Mhm.
was flying at the start of the season. Indy was Indy's Indy.
Yeah.
Um, Berkey's Berkey. I think he's still one of the best goalkeepers in MLS. It's hard now to justify the best because the team's not collectively doing as well. I did not see them having the issues. Last year, it was losses turns to draws to wins. This year, it's wins to draws to losses. And
And
then,
at home.
yeah, especially at home. Yeah, especially at home. And then the last one was Seattle. I thought that with the group and kind of a couple of the additions and maybe the development of Leo Chu, that this was going to be a great group. Jackson Reagan, Yamar, et cetera, et cetera. But it just goes to show Joao Paulo is such a massive part of success. Christian Roldan, I think, is one of the most underrated, unsung heroes in terms of, I think he always gives you like a 7 or an 8 performance every single game, but people just kind of dismiss, how good of a player he is. And then trying to figure out Raul Ruidiaz in the Jordan Morris situation. Do you take the striker that's hot, or do you take the striker that is established and use Jordan more as a wide left?
And De La Vega, like,
Can't
what's the
can't be
deal
helped.
there, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
got
I
to be
mean,
frustrating.
we've done Max and I have probably done. We did these last 2 games for Seattle. I think we've probably done 5, 6, 7 games this year, and it feels like, oh, De La Vega will be back,
Yes.
the next weekend or the next weekend. And I know he came back and played 14 minutes. I believe it was at Vancouver, and then kind of started having some tightness again. So it sounds like just, both hamstrings were giving him troubles at the beginning of the year after coming off that pre-Olympic tournament with Argentina. Um, and yeah, when you allow Nico Ladero to walk away and you invest in Pedro de la Vega, I think he's going to be a massive player. But I don't think anybody, Craig Weibel, Adrian Hanna, or Brian Smetzer, expected him to be in the situation where he's just been unavailable because of these hamstring issues.
Yeah, and that you just can't find a way to get it right, because it seems like they've tried to keep him up for a prolonged time to allow him the time to get back, and then it still is not happening. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Minnesota United and just in the Western Conference, but in the league as a whole. And I know they struggled last night mightily against a Dallas team on the road. You think you scored 3 goals on the road, you should be able to win. Defensive miscues, but in general, like the whole transition, right? We can go all the way back to the end of last year. Adrian Heath being removed, interim in Sean McCauley, interim in Cameron Knowles. then you're thinking, how do you hire the sporting director before you know who the coach is? And, all this people are going, what's happening here? How do they know what they're doing? And then Eric Ramsey comes in. Just walk me through what you're thinking and evaluating as that's all going on.
Oddly, from an external point of view, Max and I had this intimate kind of moment with Minnesota United because we were actually on the call at LAFC for
okay.
and Mark's last game. And Chris Wilder was actually, when you're at LAFC, Chris Wilder was sat right next to us with Mark Watson, and watching the game. And as the game kind of got away from Minnesota United, as did a lot of teams at BMO Stadium against LAFC, like I knew there was pressure, but I didn't anticipate either before that game or after or during that game that the decision was going to be made. So, I think Sean did an admirable job. I was joking with Timu Puki in preseason down in Miami, the Hattie that nobody saw because of everything that happened at the stadium that day. And then kind of the offseason. And Max and I actually had that game in Austin, very first game of the season.
Yeah,
and so we, long story short, I played with Cam Knowles at Real Salt Lake. So I've known Cam since 2005, and an incredible human being. Cut his teeth, obviously, in Portland, came over to Minnesota with Adrian, kind of did the second team. And it was Andrew Greger was along, and it was involved in there for a little while. So I knew kind of some of the people around the pieces. But I remember talking to Cam after the tournament in Palm Springs and like, okay, who have you spoken to? What does this look like? And trying to get a better feel and an understanding for what it was looking like behind the scenes, but then also how he was creating an environment that was like players wanted to buy in. And I think we were all kind of excited because the thing for me, it was like you got Timu up top, you got Robin Lod coming back, who's I think one of the best players in Major League Soccer that will never get the credit he really deserves. Obviously the Reynoso situation, Bongi on that right-hand side. And then all of a sudden you're like, you think about that front four, when you compare and contrast preseason predictions, that front four matches up with 99% of the best in Major League Soccer. And obviously it didn't play its way out that way. So you bring in Eric. Well, first off, Cam did an amazing job.
Yes.
I can't say that enough. What I think from the outside looking in, to get those guys to buy in such uncertain times is extraordinary. It takes something special to be able to do something like that. So when Eric came in, obviously I'm a Man United fan, so I was acutely aware of who he was and what he had done throughout his time, whether it was at Chelsea or Wales or United. I mean, being able to go through Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to Ralf Rangnick and then to obviously Erik ten Hag. The first time I spoke with him, I was incredibly impressed with his intelligence and how communicative he was and the way he chose his words. And he had this positivity about the challenges of the unknown, which was Major League Soccer. And what I loved about him immediately in the first couple of games is he wasn't afraid. Like age wasn't a number, experience wasn't a number. It's like if you showed it and you earned it, then you deserve to get that opportunity to step on the field. And I think we're seeing, I know these last two games haven't been fantastic and there's going to be dips throughout the season, but I don't want to say they've overpunched with how they've done so well or so far in the start of this season in the Western Conference, but they've certainly, I think, been the biggest surprise for investment versus player on the field versus kind of the dramatics that the group has had to deal with so far to start 2024.
And when you look at that, and to your point about when you talk to him, and Michael Boxall has talked about this when everyone asks, is it weird having a coach that's younger than you? And he's always like, first of all, he seems way more mature than me. That's kind of like Boxy's first commentary, you could do, and, I think we could all vouch for that a little bit when we have conversations. But even the way it's sort of like, and you were a player for so long, you understand this, like the way things are framed and the tone you take going into a situation can completely change how the players respond. And we did the game before they were missing the 9 or 10 guys for international duty. And before, and then they were dealing with some injuries and Tapis was gone on a green card. So like the way you position it to the players leading up to that challenge can completely change how the team goes into it. And I mean, would you say that's a fair assessment? Because it can really it can nosedive if it's not approached the right way.
It's like the when you're inside the locker room and the coach says something you don't really like, doesn't align with like what you think or what you see or what kind of get the look, and you kind of like, like everyone kind of like, you do little things. and you can lose the locker room instantly because of things like that. So I think the framing of it was more of an opportunity. And how many times throughout the course of the year, social media, fan base driven, oh, so and so's got to play. Oh my God, he's got to start. Oh my God, did you see him coming off the bench? Oh my God, this kid's so hyped. I saw him with MLS Next Pro. He deserves the opportunity. Um, I think what was genuine about the build, it was the game FC Dallas. What was genuine about that game and about Seattle is when we talked to Eric, it was, I understand the complexity of the situation. I understand the challenge of the situation. I am going to personally allow these kids to experience this as well as me experiencing this moment. So just that positivity, I think, is contagious. And it's great to see a young, dynamic manager who's been given this opportunity really figure out a way to verbalize it as a positive as opposed to maybe a challenging negative.
And then big picture, just looking at, you know, you don't have to give me your exact all-star 11 who you voted for, but is there somebody in your 11 that you maybe voted for that people wouldn't necessarily expect, or that you've seen so much of, or you're so high on that is like, wow, I could not leave this guy off? Or is there nobody that's really shocking? Because
No,
there's just so many good players to choose from.
yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, the 11 picks itself, right? I think I picked Chicho up top with Messi to the right, Buonga to the left. I picked Lucho um, with Ricky Pooch. I did Busquets sitting, although I wanted to make the argument about Emeka and Nelly because I think he's been extraordinary this season without sounding like an RSL homer. Left back, I went Jordi Alba. Left center back, who did I choose? I went with Vera. I think Vera's been a really, but I went more like positional,
Yeah.
situational for starting 11 as opposed to just throwing guys on the field. Um, let's see, Miles as my center
Mhm.
back. Goalkeeper, I went with Berkey. The right back was actually the most difficult for me because I was really thinking about, and I tried to line it up with statistics, who I thought was really good. I actually ended up with Totland, the right back for St. Louis. I think he's really high level. I think he's a really high level right back. But Robin Lod was my 1A of players that aren't going to be in the starting 11 that I think are absolutely wouldn't drop off a level. I already brought a Mecca up and a weird one. And it was funny because Taylor would just hammered me on it. And Mo was kind of teasing me about it too. I went with Matty Bogusz. So imagine Steve Toronto go, hey, Matty, I know I've been playing you in the central part of midfield. What do you think about number nine? Like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll play number nine. What do you think about number nine for like 24 games of the season? And I just think like these last couple goals he scored, I think he's what, like on 9 goals and like 7 assists of the season. He's such a good player, and I'm not surprised to see kind of some of the social media reports and the links to Lazio in Serie A because I think he's extraordinarily talented, and I think he's shown that he's a really selfless type of player that I don't know for someone that's done a bunch of LAFC games this year. I think if he wasn't overshadowed by Denny Bouanga and maybe Kike Oliveira, that he'd be one of those players that people are like, oh man, he's a better player than maybe we're giving him credit for.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a Robin Lod where you're like, hey, you can play number 9, you
Yeah,
can play the 10, you can play the wing, you can play the holding, you can
yeah.
like whatever we ask you to do, and I'll just do it,
Bring
and do it
yeah,
really well,
yeah.
like at the end of the day. And then lastly, I just want to talk even beyond MLS, but MLS combined with Copa America. What do you see from this Copa America tournament? We've got a big game tonight, a couple players, for Canada, from Minnesota United with Tani Oluwaseyi and Dane St. Clair, but bigger picture United States, you just came off, on the desk for those couple games with USA versus Brazil and Colombia, and then they've got Bolivia on the weekend. What do you see from this Copa America? And not only that, but how important is it for the US leading into what 2026 will be?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I and I know people understand this, but I think it's sometimes hard to comprehend that with the addition of Nations League, it's made it extraordinarily difficult and detrimental for the United States to have the high-profile friendlies that would match, that window last year that was Germany and Ghana, that match Colombia and Brazil. Because outside of this tournament, I mean, listen, it's insanely obvious that the United States is best in the region with regards to tournament format, not necessarily World Cup qualifying. Credit to Canada because they were extraordinary in 2021 with Herdman. Um, but it's going to be a real challenge to find games that like really, really matter. And there's always going to be a hesitancy from US soccer to go outside of the US because of obviously the financial windfall from hosting these games, but also because, the United States is hosting the World Cup. So why would you go for games outside the US? I'd love to see him go to Mexico. I'd love to see him go to Canada. I'd love to see him go down to Honduras or El Salvador and get some of these games where you're going to get punched in the face a few times. You're going to have to deal with some adversity as opposed to being comfortable in the United States. But I think that's more of a theoretical idea that I've had for a long, long time. And that trickles to the under 23s, the under 20s, the under 17s, all the way down, because I think those life lessons are important. But in terms of this tournament, yeah, listen, for me, Argentina and Uruguay are the two favorites. I think that Colombia is a better team than Brazil right now. That's just my humble opinion. I think Ecuador is probably going to be the big dark horse. I did Argentina, Ecuador in between the Colombia and Brazil game, and Moises Caicedo was kicking Rodrigo de Paul up and down the field. And Kyndra Paez is going to be an extraordinary player that next summer is going to go join Chelsea. So keep an eye on the 17-year-old number 10 for Ecuador. The U.S., Mexico, and Canada, I think at a bare minimum, it has to be quarterfinals. And maybe the one good thing for the United States is that depending on how the two groups end up, they're facing either Brazil or Colombia in that quarterfinal once they get out of the group stage. So the slow burn through Bolivia and Panama heading into Uruguay is kind of an ideal start. It'll set the tone, set the momentum. But they needed, from a psychological perspective, I think both internally and externally for all of us on social media and punditry and former players, because we saw that performance against Brazil, that's baseline expectation of what they're capable of doing and now what we expect them to do, not Christian coming off at halftime and Gio coming off with 30 minutes remaining and it being 2-1 and Tim saying, I'm going to put this on my shoulders. I'm going to run. I'm going to score another goal and the game getting away and the subs not matching the intensity. And by the way, those Colombia subs, those 5 guys that came on the field were all starters in previous games. So they were really pissed that Nestor didn't start them in that game against the United States. So it's mentality, right? It's mentality. And Greg was verbalizing it's kind of the growth and it's the model and it's what we're trying to become. I understand that. And I understand that they're friendlies, but at the same time, the expectations now are higher coming off these 3 consecutive Nations League trophies. So yeah, I hope their performance aligns with what all of our hopes, desires, and expectations are in this Copa America.
Well, and not to sound like too old to date myself too much here, but that's where like everything that these kids have now could be a blessing and a curse. Yeah. Right. Because I hear you talk about it. I hear Lexi Laws talk about it. Like, you just want these guys, like all the things that they have, the nutritionist, the dietitian, the masseuse, the this, the that, the private charters, you know what I mean? Like, there's no reason, like, have they gotten too much and they're too comfortable instead of like battling. But at the end of the day, you still got to go out there and perform. And that's like, I think everybody just wants to see that from this group, especially this group.
It's funny because I agree with you 100%. And at the same time, like, I guess my counter argument, if I was at the desk and I was arguing back and forth with Alexi, and by the way, Alexi was like my big brother. When I turned pro, I played next to Alexi at the New England Revolution. So legendary arguments and conversations of me being this young little turd, Alexi with his hair and his goatee, just strumming his guitar back in 97. The flip side of that argument is like, hey, man, we've never really had this much success on a domestic level of players playing overseas. So this idea that they're not gritty enough or they're not tough enough or they're not experienced enough, when we maybe talk about CONCACAF-esque type situations, maybe there's a fine line to that. But the reality is these guys are leading themselves in environments where the language difference, the culture's different, the food, the weather, they don't have
the pressure they play at for those clubs overseas.
And then Europa League and Champions League and all of these things and, expectations of, you better win or you're not getting out of the stadium until 4 a.m. and you don't even think about walking around the city if you don't win. So yeah, again, I'm insanely jealous, man. I know you feel the same way when we talk about the growth of the women's game of NWSL, watching Utah Royals come back here, seeing the infrastructure that they have compared to what they had last time. I mean, having housing paid for and all NIL money that's coming into play.
Yeah.
It's just it's a different world nowadays.
Yeah, and we got to go. Like, I feel like there's at least 7 games on the television right now that I'm supposed to be watching. It's like one of those days. This is like what we live for, though. You know, this is like where you can get up in the morning, it's already on with the Euros, and it just goes right through your day. And then we got a big game tonight. So just no rest for the weary when we got to get our soccer fix. So I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, just flew back this morning. I'm sure you're heading out for the weekend shortly for the next match, but I appreciate you taking the time, Dunny, and enjoy the rest of your carpooling evening.
Good to see you as always. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. All right, thanks everybody. Stay tuned next week, another episode of Sound of the Loons. Have a great day, everybody.